And now I'm very excited to introduce our presenter, Ruby Namdar, an Israeli-American author born and raised in Jerusalem. His novel, The Ruined House, won the Sapir Prize, Israel's most prestigious literary award. The English edition of The Ruined House, translated by Hillel Halkin, was published by HarperCollins in 2017. The French edition of the novel was nominated I do not speak French, but the very prestigious French award in 2018. He currently
I can't pronounce it either.
Okay, thank you. I was like, oh my gosh, it just keeps going on and on.
There's no way I could pronounce it.
Okay, good. Ruby currently lives in New York City with his wife and 2 daughters and teaches Jewish literature. And now here's Ruby.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I would love to see your beautiful faces. Those of you who are feeling confident enough to turn the camera on. If not, let there be light. L'shana haba, face to face, okay? Next year, face to face. But you know what? There are rewards to Zoom. There's definitely some intimacy to this new medium, and I think we can reap the rewards of all lifestyle. So Chag Sameach, happy holiday. I want to share with you tonight one of my absolutely most favorite texts in not just Jewish literature, but like world literature. I think it's a literary masterpiece. And it's so multi-layered that we need like 7 tikkunim to study all of it. So we're gonna start, and there's always another year, you know? Like Scarlett O'Hara said, next year is another year. We're gonna start with one of the anthems of Talmudic storytelling, of Aggadah. And a word about the Talmud and Aggadah and its amazing method of storytelling. The Talmud, I'm not going to give you a whole lesson about what's a Talmud, Google it, but what we need to understand about the Talmud is that it's not a book. To think of it as a book is a mistake. The Talmud is a library. It's a whole catalog of issues. Under everything, there's more and more information. And it's divided to a lot of sections. Each one of them deals with a certain slice of human existence. So it is not a holy book. It's not a religious book in the way that we think today, that it's all about God and piety. Yeah, there's a fair amount of that, but this is not the purpose of the Talmud at all. It's also not a halachic book like the Shulchan Aruch, where you open the book if you follow the halacha in order to know what to do now. If you're going to open the Talmud to find out what am I supposed to do as a good Jew, you are screwed. The Talmud loves to ask questions. The Talmud does not feel obliged to answer them. I love to say that I would say I'm not a Talmudic expert. I'm an author, but that I would say my bet is for every 10 questions the Talmud opens, maybe the Talmud answers 8, maybe. It answers 2, 8 remain unanswered, maybe 7. The rest is just left vague because asking the question, presenting the issue, is it enough for the Talmud? Another very fascinating aspect of the Talmud, it's the way it weaves very rigorous, analytical, legalistic debates with the most imaginative, wacky, daring storytelling you could imagine. Now, in past generations, the rabbis that, let's say, claimed ownership of the Talmud over the Talmud told us that the real Talmud is the legalistic debate, and the stories are for like us, you know, the schleppers, women, secular Jews, you know. So thank God that the Talmud was much wiser than all of the people that try to interpret it. Because today we, the people who are not of the rabbinic, small rabbinic elite, look to the Talmud as a source of inspiration and a source of an anchor of our Jewish identity. And for us, the Aggadah, the narrative part of the Talmud, is an amazing treasure of meaning, of beauty, of stimulation, of inspiration. And thankfully, nobody had the authority or the courage to edit the Aggadic parts out. Although I cannot imagine that many Orthodox rabbis did not want to edit these stories out because they're so irreverent. They're so chutzpahdik. The Aggadah is so audacious and dares to ask so many questions, and nobody comes out as a saint from the Talmudic story. And if somebody comes out as a saint, he's the least, or usually the least saintly person you can imagine. So today we're going to hear a story about the wisest man who has ever lived according to Jewish mythology, which is of course King Solomon, HaChacham Ba'adam, the wisest of all men, the wisest of all people. King Solomon is an archetype of what we call the philosopher king in Jewish mythology. And in every mythology, there's an equivalent to King Solomon. Someone who at the same time has political and symbolic power, but a divine wisdom. And this is like a fantasy. Plato speaks about the philosopher king. Buddhism has stories about philosopher kings. It is a role that civilizations like to allocate to certain characters in their history that embody power and wisdom. So let's remember this when we read the story and see what the Talmud does to the character that embodies power and wisdom, the man who has it all. Let's start reading. I shared the text. Do you see the text or not so much? No. Okay, that's not good. Let me upload the text. Do you see it now? I don't hear you, so what are we going to do about it?
Yes, we can see the text. Good. You can continue.
Good. Okay, so this whole crazy saga begins with a very obscure verse from Kohelet. For the life of me, I cannot pronounce the English. It's actually Greek name of it, Ecclesiastes. Kohelet, the bittersweet book of wisdom that is attributed to old King Solomon. There's a whole question about whether it's really King Solomon or not, but that's for a different class. But let's look at the famous chapter 2, and let's read together the second verse. I gathered me also silver and gold and treasures and this and that, such as golds have of their own, men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, women very many. Okay, so that sounds very, whatever it sounds, but there's a problem with the translation. And this is the only time in this session where the Hebrew speakers will have the unfair advantage of actually reading the original Hebrew. And the reason I'm saying it is because the Talmudic passage we're going to learn together is written in Aramaic, and I would say 95 Israelis who grew up speaking Hebrew cannot read Aramaic to save their lives. So we're all on equal footing here, which is kind of nice. I'm gonna, with your permission, read the Hebrew. Kanasti ligam kesef v'zahav, and also listen to the beauty of the language. Kohelet is an amazing piece of poetry. It's just intoxicatingly beautiful, the language. Kanasti ligam kesef v'zahav, וסגולות מלכים והמדינות. עשיתי לי שרים ושרות, ותענוגות בני האדם, שידה ושידות. Now the translator chose to iron a certain wrinkle in the text in order to protect us, save us from ourselves, which is the last two words, shida v'shidot. These are not words that we know in Hebrew. The closest words we know that sound like them is male and female demons. From this, we learn that King Solomon owned or hired the services of demons. And because this is an uncomfortable thought, the translators thought they might as well omit that part and allow us to enjoy a harmonious text that we can relate to. Only the Bible is not harmonious. It is way too beautiful to be harmonious. So now we're going to go to the Talmud, Tractate Gittin, and read how our rabbis opened this text. And I want to say something about why I chose to study this text with you tonight. I feel that this is a hard time, especially for me, a Yerushalmi, a Jerusalemite, an Israeli. It seems like so much of our existence is at stake, and not just our political existence, but our cultural, moral existence. It's such a hard time. And at times like this, we need to remember what Judaism, in my opinion, really is about, which is the absolute freedom of the mind and the expansion of the framework of the human imagination. So the Talmud does that. The Talmud takes the human imagination, takes the frame and expands it as far as it can go, from one side of the horizon to another, without paying regard to any convention. It will do whatever it takes to expand imagination. And for me, this is sort of a sacred mission, to expand the human mind so much. So they take an obscure little verse, male and female demons, as here they translate, and let's see where they take this. Wonderful places. As indicated in the verse, and the house when it was built, the house meaning, of course, the temple, was made of stone made ready in the quarry. But according to the Bible, you are not supposed to chisel the stone for the mizbeach, for the altar, and for the temple with iron, with metal, because metal in this time is weapon. The only use of metal is weapon. So a metal is a material of death and destruction. And I just want to say that this is so poignant, teaching this and studying this together with you tonight, as we see what's happening now in Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount compound is at the heart of so much metal, so much death and animosity, and the endless wisdom of saying you cannot build a holy, a sacred place using the metal that is the instrument of killing and murder. So there was a need to bring a very strange creature, and this is where the imagination soars to heavens, called the Shamir. On line 5, there is the Shamir, which Moses brought for the stone of the ephod, the stones on the breastplate of the high priest. What is the Shamir? The Shamir is a mythological creature that if you put, it's kind of a worm, that if you place it, according to this myth, on a slab of marble, it just cuts it in a beautiful straight line without using metal. So there's the creature that helps you chisel stone without using the instruments of violence. But where is this creature? Who knows? Listen to the method of how do you find out where the Shamir is. Bring a male and a female demon and tie them together. It's a form of bizarre torture of demons. Perhaps they know and will tell you. Now, a word about demons. Today, we think of demons as a metaphor, right? My demons, you go to analysis, you go to therapy, you're like, oh, my demons are howling. But as a matter of fact, until about 100 years ago, demons and demonology was an inseparable part of mainstream Judaism as well as mainstream every other religion. Christianity, Islam. Demons are like the counter-human. They are the shadow existence of our existence. Everybody believed in demons. It is very new and kind of radical not to believe in demons. Okay? Read Dostoevsky, Brother Karamazov. He does amazing things with this. So, how do we get the demons? They get the demons, they tie them together, and they interrogate them. And they say, we don't know where this creature is, but Ashmedai, the prince of the demons, he knows. Ashmedai, a very intriguing character. Ashmedai is and is not Satan. And Satan himself is not exactly a character. Our version of the devil, of Satan, is not at all that scary prince of darkness that, or maybe it is reading this book, reading this story, but it's not mainstream to think of it that way. Rather, it is one of the angels and it's a trickster. The job of Satan, or the king of the demons, Ashmedai, is to expose our own contradictions to ourselves. Every time we feel high and mighty, every time we feel very pious, Satan comes and like removes a mask from our face and laughs. That's basically the job of Satan in Jewish culture, early Jewish culture, to expose our, excuse me, I'm going to say a terrible word, bullshit. This is the job of the demon. Where is Ashmedai, king of the demon? He's in this mountain. Of course, now, of course, we're shot into the realm of high mythology. He's in this and that mountain, a mountain with no name. He has dug a pit there, which he fills with water and covers with stone. He then seals it with his seal. This is this huge demon. Every day, and listen to what Ashmedai does with his time. He goes up to heaven and studies in the academy of the sky, which means with the angel and God. So Ashmedai is actually a scholar of the Torah. And at night, he comes down, drinks a lot of water because studying Torah in heaven is very thirsty, and goes to sleep. And King Solomon sends his mythological hero, Benayahu ben Yehoyada, who has so many great stories attached to his name that it's like a book should be written about it. And he gives him, and this is where we are in the realm of Talmudic science fiction, a chain on which the holy name of God is engraved. So now we're in the realm of fantasy. He comes in with a chain, and the chain will weaken the demon. Nothing else could weaken the demon. Think of vampire movies, you know, when we were little. Scary. You know it's not real, but it's so scary. Okay? And some fleeces of wood and bottles of wine. So he has a plan. He goes, he digs a hole under the pit. He empties the demon's pit out of water. He pours in the wine. Think of this plan, yes? It wouldn't shame the most sophisticated intelligence services of our time. Fills it with wine, so that the seal on the hole is not going to be broken. And Ashmedai comes at night, and he's very thirsty. But he realizes that this is wine, not water, because, a human cannot really trick the king of the demons. So he says, no, 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 I will not drink this. And now comes a wonderful string of verses. Every verse that Ashmedai is going to quote now, because Ashmedai, like a good rabbi, the king of demons, uses verses from the Bible all the time as a way of speaking. Which verses does he use? All of them are taken from the 3 books of wisdom that King Solomon wrote. So this story actually is about King Solomon, his wisdom, and his hubris. The excessive pride of the man who thought he's too smart for the world, too cool for the world. Eventually he breaks down, as happens to all of us, Solachim. He drinks his fill of the wine. He was too thirsty, happens to all of us. He drinks, falls asleep. Benayahu ben Yehoiada came, tied him with the chain. He could not resist the chain. The name, the holy name, the magical name of God is on it. And now we have a cinematic picture of this like heroic human leading this gigantic, scary monster of a king of the demons in a chain, like a bear or some monstrous pet, back to Jerusalem to the king. And a few things happen. I'm going to skip some of them, but I ask you to read them at home. He sees, okay, he comes to a hut of a poor old woman, and he wants to rub himself against it. Like, again, think of the animalistic effect of this huge creature. And this is a little hut made of wood. The woman comes and beseeches him to save her home, and she's like, okay, I won't do it. And then he sees a blind man. He puts him on the right path. He sees a drunk man, and he puts him on his path as well. He does all these mysterious acts of chesed, yes, of kindness. Then the demon sees a wedding procession and starts laughing and starts crying. He sees a man at the shoemaker's hut saying, please make shoes for me that are so good that they will last me for 7 years. He starts laughing. He sees a man sitting on a diviner, a man who's a soothsayer, sitting and divining, and he starts laughing. When they reach Jerusalem, and the explanation for all these weird behaviors will come. When they reach Jerusalem, he's brought to the jail of King Solomon. And this is a king of the demons. He's not like a minor demon. For 3 days, King Solomon is too busy to see him. Too busy. Which is, of course, great hubris. Very impolite. This is a captive king. Ashmedai is not a schlepper, as we will soon find out. And he says, hello, why doesn't the king want to see me? He brought me here. Oh, he overdrunk himself, the servants say. This is the 2nd page. So he had too much to drink last night. So the king, the demon puts 2 bricks upon one another, saying, give him more wine tonight. He will need, a hair of the dog that bit him. The next day, the king doesn't see him. What happened? Oh, he ate too much. He gives them a hint of how to cure him. And so on. All of these are ways in which the storyteller emphasizes that King Solomon's wisdom went up to his head. The theme of intoxication, mind you, is very strong here. The demon refuses to get intoxicated, but the king is getting intoxicated. Think about it. Intoxication as in letting go. You're feeling so secure. You feel so on top of your game that you let go, you let your hair down, as the Americans like to say. You drink, you lose control. The demon does not lose control. He is forced to, once, fatal mistake. But he's not going to repeat that. The king is behaving carelessly. He's underestimating Ashmedai, king of the demons. Okay? Finally, the king consents, he finally has time to see him. He says, on the third day, he says, he took a brick, Ashmedai, and made a small mark on the ground and basically signaling to the king, saying, you are a mere mortal. When you die, all the space you will take in the world is these 4 cubits of a grave. Be careful. Don't underestimate me. So Solomon calls him in, and he asks him about the secret of the Shamir, of this. You remember the Shamir? The creature that cut stone? So Ashmedai reveals the secret to him. There's a certain bird. Here it's called woodpecker. Woodpecker is a funny way of translating it. Some strange bird that nobody knows, that owns it and hides the Shamir, and the messengers, Benayahu ben Yehoyada and his people go, they get that creature, the bird kills itself because it was a guardian of the Shamir, and so on. Then the work of the temple is finished. And Ashmedai delivered the goods. He let the king know what the king asked. So there was a deal here. King Solomon asked him for something. Ashmedai gave him that something. But things are never so smooth. Before we go to understand what happened, we will take a minute to understand what were the weird things that Ashmedai did. And the Talmud takes some serious effort to explain. Basically, Ashmedai says, I had pity on that woman because the book of Solomon says this and that. And I had pity on the blind man because the good book says that and that. I had pity on the drunkard because I felt that he is such an evil person, such a wicked, that he needs to get all the grace that he needs in this world so he can go to hell and then be kind of reborn as a righteous man. Okay? And now things are becoming closer to home. When I saw a wedding procession, I cried because I knew the groom will die soon. So here we have the tension between the wisdom of the demon and between what we humans know. Where does the demon get his wisdom? The demon has the divine gaze. The demon is part of God's entourage. The demon knows what we don't know. We are what in the Buddhists call the Maya, the world of phenomena. The demon sees through it. He says, the groom is so happy he just married the love of his life. I'm the only one who knows he will not live past 30 days. The man who asked the shoemaker to make him shoes for 7 years, he will not live for another month. How can he? Why does he want to spend money on shoes that will last him 7 years? The man that sat there trying to divine, to divinate and understand how to become rich was actually sitting on a big treasure of gold, but he had no way of seeing it. I could see it. What do we have here? We have here a satire about, and this is where things become this is the axis of this story. It's a satire about the illusion of knowledge. And this is the Talmud, a book that, is devoted to wisdom, making fun of the illusion of wisdom. And ask me why I love the Talmud so much because of that. Because here are writers who gave their life to the pursuit of wisdom, who are at the same time not only skeptical about the validity of wisdom, but ironic about it. This irony, at the same time, to be fully devoted to wisdom, but also be ironic about it, for me, this is the essence of Judaism. This duality, to be so devoted yet ironic about it. It is a very hard tension to hold, and the Talmud holds it beautifully. So the king, I'm going to skip a little bit because we want to go into the heart of darkness, if you will. And we're at the bottom of page 2. Solomon kept him until he had built the temple. Okay? He kept him prisoner. And then he just wants to banter with him. And he says, what is your superiority over us, the demons? And now Ashmedai, who is by now sick and tired of this young king full of hubris who thinks he knows everything, says, well, why don't you take off this chain and give me your ring and I'll show you. And King Solomon, who is really drunk, and again, I'm using this word on purpose because this is about being drunk and letting go too early, drunk on his own wisdom and power, does that. Once he takes off the chain and ring, Ashmedai becomes that enormous king of demons again. He swallowed him, took him, placed him on one wing. And I want you to think about this amazing visual that the Talmud creates. Like this gigantic demon holds the little human on one palm, and like a big catapult, he catapults him to the other side of the world. And there's no more King Solomon. Okay? He hurled him, page 3, 400 parsangs. Parsang is a Persian measuring, which is like 1.6 miles or something. So he hurls him very far to the other side of the ancient world. Okay? By the way, all the texts now that they use as a proof text is from the book of Kohelet, which according to this legend is attributed, that was written in the time where King Solomon was exiled from Jerusalem. According to this legend, King Solomon spent a few years, and I want you to stop and think about what I'm saying now. King Solomon, the wisest of all men, spent a substantial amount of time of his life as a homeless man walking the streets, while the king of demons sat on the throne of David in Jerusalem and reigned over the nation of Israel. I want these words to resonate. This is very, very audacious. This is very radical. This is very irreverent story. Because these kings are not just kings, they're not political figures. They are the ancestors of our nation. What does it mean that the demon sat on the throne of Solomon, the man who built the temple in Jerusalem, and reigned on Israel, on the nation of Israel? A demon instead of a king? So this is where the story becomes very dark and very interesting. All the anecdotal part is off of it now. The demon rules over Jerusalem. Think of it as one of like these Batman stories, like the Joker has taken over Gotham City. The king of darkness is now the king of the everybody thinks that he's the president. Okay, this is this kind of oppositioning. By the way, when these stories were told, and this was oral Torah, there were no other means of representation. There were no movies, there were no TV, there was no radio. a person sitting and telling this story. These are stories that storytellers used as kind of a blueprint for their storytelling. The listeners are listening riveted, and they see pictures and they hear the sound. And this story has the effect of a big Hollywood production of great fantasy and fear, like a horror movie. It has the same impact on the listeners. King Solomon was thrown out of the land. The demon reigns over Jerusalem. All hell breaks loose, quite literally. In the meanwhile, the poor king, very much humbled, used to go around begging in the street. He became a homeless man, saying wherever he went, I, Kohelet, was king over in Israel, in Jerusalem, which, of course, is the first verse of, it's in the first chapter of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. First verse. I was the king. I'm King Solomon. I'm King Solomon. When it came to the Sanhedrin, so somebody came and said to the rabbis, there's a madman walking in the street saying that he's the king, he's the king, he's the king. One of the rabbis say, wait a minute, let us see. And madmen was not stick to one thing only. Madmen, they meander, their minds meander. This guy is too persistent. Let's call him in, let's have him interrogated. They asked Benayahu, again, Benayahu, the king's right-hand man, the kind of head of security. Does the king call for you? And Benayahu said, as a matter of fact, no, I haven't seen him in so long. The king never doesn't send him for me anymore. Why not? Because Benayahu knows Ashmedai. But mind you, nobody else seems to be able to tell the difference. We learn a lot from this story about power, about, you know, the story about the king it has no clothes, the emperor has no clothes. That there's the herd mentality. People are just sure that this is the king. A demon can sit on the throne, but people will not dare to like see the truth. So this is a very subversive story, very subversive, very refreshingly so. They send back and says, they go and say, okay, this is strange. Benayahu usually would be called to the king every day. Let's ask his wives. And as you know, the wives, King Solomon had quite a few. So they sent to the queen saying, does the king visit you? They sent back and said, yes, he does. And we can only guess the tone of voice here. Oh boy, yes, he does. So clearly Ashmedai makes a point of visiting all the wives of King Solomon. And it's not for tea that he comes. Do you understand how radical and daring this storytelling is? You basically speak about the king of Israel and his wives, the mothers of the princes. What? They were basically being visited by the king of demons instead of by King Solomon. That's a very intense thing to say in a world where, you know, purity and monogamy are celebrated, at least if you're a woman. And they said, and listen to this. They say, yes, he does. Then he said to them, examine his legs. Why legs? The only difference, according to this story, between the demons and humans is that demons have a rooster's leg. Imagine that creature, humanoid with the legs of a rooster, feet of a rooster with the claws. They sent back and says, he comes in his stockings. He somehow never takes his stockings off. He doesn't want to show his feet. And then the rabbis pull the doomsday weapon, the doomsday machine. Listen to this Freud would have a field day on this, Sigmund Freud. They then sent for his mother, King Solomon's mother, Bathsheba. And they said, does he visit you as well? And she said, yes, he does. You understand? The king of demons would not stop until he also had King Solomon's mother. That's when the rabbis understand what happened. When it comes to the Oedipus thing. I wanted to take a minute and think about this, how radical it is, how irreverent this idea is, how modern it is for an ancient text, right? I cannot stop being at awe from this like boldness of this text. So they understand that it's the king of the demons. They come, they get the same chain, they throw the chain on him, okay? And they get rid of the demon, and they bring the king back to the palace. Hollywood happy end, seemingly. But now two very interesting things happened, almost at the end. Therefore, from there on, Ashmedai flew away, but he remained in fear of him. For the rest of his life, King Solomon was morbidly afraid of Ashmedai. He was traumatized. He knew that Ashmedai won. Ashmedai made his point. Ashmedai invaded the palace. Ashmedai destroyed the purity of the king's wives. Ashmedai made the king into a homeless man. Ashmedai won. He made his point. The king's hubris was his fall. And King Solomon remained morbidly afraid. And there's a beautiful verse from the Song of Songs about the king of Solomon with 60 armed men holding their swords surrounding his bed. That's a pretty, that's a lot of guards for a bed, 60. So they took this verse from Song of Songs and to show how much fear remained. And in order for this to be even more disturbing, and in a minute we're going to open this to questions and comments, is having heard this story, Rab and Shmuel, two great sages in Amoraim of the later Talmudic era, one said that Solomon, listen to this, they say it, we are left to decipher what they're saying. One of them, we don't know which one, said that Solomon was first king and then a commoner, okay? And other says that he was first king, then a commoner, and then a king again. So according to the story, the king was born a prince, a king, became a commoner for a short, very traumatic time, which he spent the rest of his life in PTSD because, and returned to the throne. But the other, what does he say? First a king, then a commoner. He was actually never brought back to his throne. Do you understand the gravity of this statement? So the kings of Israel, according to this interpretation, were all sons of demons. According to one of the rabbis, King Solomon was never brought back to the throne. Ashmedai remained the king of Israel. And that's a very strong statement about political power, wisdom, and the diabolic forces. I would love to hear what people have to say. And let's, somebody promised to read me questions if they came. Austin? Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear
That's
you.
good. Are there any questions?
So we had a couple of questions come in. The first was, do we know when the text was written?
Ah, that's a great question. The Talmud is composed over a few centuries in various locations in the world. So I would say any time between the 2nd and 6th, 7th century AD, like, about 18 to 1600 years ago. But I want to point out that the biblical text that it refers to is already considered an ancient text in the time of the Talmud. So what the Talmudic sages that write this amazing story do is similar to what we're doing now, where we are reading an ancient text and riffing off of it and like making it ours in an imaginative way. So the story of Solomon is much, much older. So they're basically taking a historic text and playing with it.
And then the other question that came in from the audience was, is it possible that the satire is against foreign rulers rather than the Jewish leaders?
Yeah, it is. It is, although I think it could very well be. But it could also be a satire against Jewish rulers. It could be a satire against all rulers. It could be, I think it's mostly a satire against the high and mighty. All high and mighty. The people who are like, oh, I conquered it all. I know it all. That's how I read it personally. But yeah, the historic, we don't know the historic context in which the story was written or told and then written. And many people may have attached a lot of meanings to this story. There's so many readings of this story over the years.
So I'm going to sort of paraphrase this next one, which is about sort of is the idea that the rabbinical wisdom is greater than the wisdom through political power. Is it an argument of rabbis versus kings?
Yeah. There's a lot of readings along these lines, and I'm sure some of them are valid. I mean, this is not an invalid reading. However, knowing the rabbinic culture from within, I would say that most rabbis would think of themselves as the disciples of King Solomon and the philosopher king. So sometimes we project our own conflicts on the ancient past of our people with the rabbis versus this Kohanim. But if you read the close reading, you will see that the rabbis are very identified with the priests, and then they're very identified with Solomon. And so they kind of see themselves as the disciples, those who continue the legacy of King Solomon. So the answer is yes and no and maybe, which is a very Jewish way to answer a question.
That's very true. Are there other stories of Ashmedai?
There are some stories, but this is by far the best. Ashmedai, by the way, appears in many folk tales, and in the Zohar, the book of Splendor. Zohar is the book of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalistic book. They refer to the book of Ashmedai as if it's a source, only we don't know of a book like that. So like, as we know, in the book of Ashmedai, it is written, and then they just quote something. But we don't know of a book of Ashmedai. So maybe there's a book of Ashmedai, like, the gospel Avdil of Judas, the gospel of the king of demons, who will tell this history from a very different angle. But somehow somebody hid it somewhere, and one day it might be found. Yeah, but Ashmedai definitely has a presence, and he's a very juicy and cool character. Very cool character.
Someone asked if the demons are entirely evil.
No, they're not. They are not. The demons are not. look, we have to cleanse ourselves from a lot of non-Jewish concepts about the devil and the demons, and also like late and medieval ideas that they became more evil. But in the Talmud, they're like tricksters. Yes, they're called the mazikim because they cause damages, but they're not so scary. They're like there to get you. Think of leprechauns. Think of these annoying but funny creatures, tricksters. As by the way is Satan. Often Satan is a trickster rather than like, oh, the scary creature, you know.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
More questions? I want to ask you a question. Do you share my awe? Do you see what I mean about how much imagination? Isn't this so wonderful and liberating? Something worthy of celebration to have this type of, I feel like it gives us this story, and these are going to be my good night words to you. This story gives us a license to imagine, a license to go with our imagination, to say, go for it, chevre, go with it. And this is such an empowering, liberating message that the rabbis and the Talmud and Jewish learning in general sends to us in saying, here's the canon, I have news for you. It's yours, go with it. Take it to wherever your mind can take it. And I want us to end on this very optimistic note. I thank you for joining me. Chag Sameach. The skies are open tonight, so let's make it a good night.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you.
Good night. Chag Sameach. Happy holiday.